So on the subject of underserved markets, I present Fatherly. Mike Rothman, co-founder, along with Simon Isaacs, who's here, of Fatherly. And so it started with an observation. And that observation is that there are a ton of resources targeting this guy who's a profligate spender in his 20s with tons of disposable income spending on himself. But what happens when this happens? When all of a sudden this guy grows up to be a responsible father. And so this question also was relevant to me because I was marketing to this audience over the last 8 years as publisher of Thrillist. And I found myself aging out of the audience and wondering, well, who's serving us? Who's serving this guy? And the answer is that, well, no one. The kind of parenting media publications tend to focus either explicitly or implicitly on moms. And there's a tremendous long tail of mom blogs, 4.2 million at last count, that have gotten increasingly more sophisticated. But what's interesting is that this is also dovetailed with larger kind of macroeconomic trends as men have become much more involved in domestic purchasing decisions. This is kind of a non-scientific representation of what we see, that with this increasing kind of responsibility, it almost as like a counterbalance to the lean-in movement. The economy over the last 10 years has actually hurt men significantly more than women. And this isn't necessarily just a coastal phenomenon, it's actually much more pronounced in the middle of the country. Attitudinally, things have shifted according to the latest Pew and census polls. Men and women now look at parenting as a shared responsibility. However, it's divided. And you can actually see how that's manifested its way into popular culture with this evolving portrait of the man as a father. And what's interesting about this period in a guy's life is that actually, according to psychologists, it's like the real kind of proper entree into adulthood, more so than getting a job or getting married. Having a kid is really when, according to most psychologists, a guy becomes an adult. And it's also, for marketers, when this particular guy enters into a whole plethora of new purchasing categories to the tune of almost $400,000. And this is in the Wall Street Journal a couple weeks ago. And this is on a single child, and this is the average family between the year of 0 and the age, between the time your kid goes to college. And this is excluding education. This is excluding tennis lessons, swim lessons, and all these other, and all sorts of other things you might lavish on your kid. So the idea was, let's build a platform that delivers general interest content, new products, new services. We've seen that all these Google engineers, all of these makers that we've been highlighting this evening are also now having children. And they've actually been bringing that same sense of industry and entrepreneurship to parenting. And we've found that there's a ton of stuff there to document for this particular consumer who's interested in kind of applying all these technical innovations to his home life. And so the idea is general interest content married with age and stage specific recommendations. And if you look at all the other parenting publications, they kind of purport to do the same thing, but it's kind of awkward because they're not specifically tailored in terms of presentation length and tone to the way that a guy would consume content. So we approached this a bit incrementally. Instead of just going and raising a bunch of money and building a website and crossing our fingers, we decided, you know what, let's test the hypothesis that we can actually deliver value for this particular consumer just through careful curation of content and the development of a very particular voice. And so to do this, we partnered with the 92Y, which had access to about 2,500 new parents through their parenting groups, and the NYC Dads, which is the largest meetup group of new dads in New York, and developed a very simple landing page just to capture email addresses. We sent a dedicated email to them. We said, hey, like we're testing this concept of Fatherly. Please sign up. Yielded a couple hundred subscribers, put together a couple benchmarks on what we wanted to achieve. And the content that we've developed has been this. So here's one concept, 940 Saturdays. So there's actually only 940 Saturdays that you have between the time your kid is born and the time your kid turns 18. So what are you going to do with them? And so to answer this, we've partnered with domain experts from a variety of domains. In this instance, the world's preeminent sandcastle building expert to give very practical tips and tricks on what to do at the beach with a 0 to 1-year-old, 1 to 2-year-old, et cetera. We have another franchise called Why is the Sky Blue? Inevitably, your kid's going to ask you questions about basic scientific phenomena of which you should probably know the answer, but don't. And so in this instance, we talked to a lightning physicist to give very specific answers to those questions, both for you and a way for you to explain that to your child. Even Arnie Duncan, we've been doing this nights and weekends. We managed to get Arnie Duncan, Secretary of Education, to give very practical tips on how to think about pre-K and nursery school programs. So now that we've kind of proven that this MVP works, and we've only been doing this with general interest content, our plan for the next 12 months is actually to build out the age and stage specific content, focusing on pregnancy to the end of year 2, given that that's when this particular consumer has kind of the greatest need. Building in commerce templates. Again, if this consumer is spending $400,000 between 0 and 17, there's a big opportunity for us to serve very tailored commerce recommendations. Building user tools, such as a private, the idea of like Google groups, where guys can nominate other parents and friends whose opinion they trust, and kind of share information back and forth with them that we wouldn't be able to provide for ourselves, and a bunch of audience development initiatives. Thank you.
Awesome. If there's not really competition, this is effing brilliant. And as we speak about innovation, it just seems to me, finding these markets, it's surprisingly similar to Rust Belt. It's like people don't want to go after the things that aren't gone after, but that's where the vision is. But you got to help me. Who's the closest competition?
I think the closest competition are these 10, 15-year-old companies, or even older, in the parenting space. The baby centers, the parents.com, but they've been focusing on moms. And even if they don't say so explicitly, the numbers indicate that. And
what are those numbers? I assume it's 80-20, but what?
Well, for those publications, it's 80-20, or you have men who've been kind of forced to sign up. And so actually part of the way that we intend to market is actually by marketing through women's lifestyle, pregnancy, and parenting channels, because these media companies recognize that their users want to offer the husbands, the guy, some kind of like league minimum level of involvement. And so what we're developing is a website that's tailored very specifically to where you are in the parenting life cycle, along with an email product.
So is part of it that men have changed and they actually now want to engage in having 980 Saturdays, or what was the number?
940 Saturdays.
947, yeah. Has the market changed? Why is it, is Joe still here? Why is Hearst not doing this? There you go. Yeah, really.
Well, I think in the past...
Why did Hearst and Conde and all the other guys miss this?
Well, I think they may have tried 10, 15 years ago. I think Cookie might be an example. But the idea was that they were developing... they were trying to go after parents generally, and it's impossible to market to men if you're also marketing to women. If you market to men, women will inevitably follow. If you look at the demographics of any men's lifestyle publication, it's usually 60-40, 65-35. And the publishers of those publications covet the female subscribers.
So the elevator speech is like Thrillist for slightly older guys who don't get to drink beer anymore?
Or they do. So the idea is the guy necessarily hasn't changed. Whereas let's say Thrillist is a bit more irreverent, this is a bit more wry. We recognize that our guy has less time, so we have to be even more
So is the model similar? Like we start with a newsletter and then we buy an e-commerce platform and tie the two together?
Well, I think
you're going to use the same playbook, which has obviously worked.
I think it's much more condensed. I don't think we look at commerce as something we evolve into. I think it's something that we start with day one. Email will always be a phenomenal channel. Simply because it's a direct one-to-one relationship that we own. But that said, we're taking very much an omni-channel approach, just because it's impossible. I think it's a bit antiquated to think that you can develop a publication that's just an email or just a social feed, et cetera.